Hi, we're live here at CSDT with Shannon, Kelly, and Richard. We're just going to give everyone just a minute to join us and join in. And in the meantime, let us know where you're from because we love to see how far reaching everyone who's tuning in is. I'll start. I'm Shannon, and I'm here in our offices in Celebration, Florida. And I see there's Rainer, who's from the Czech Republic. Hi, Rainer. We got your question. And Matthew Sim from Singapore. And Kelly, do you see some people coming in?
Well, hello, I'm Kelly tuning in from also sunny Celebration, Florida. I see we have Deb here from Roanoke, Virginia. Wow, classy. Rich, do you see anyone?
If you'd like, I can send you.
Oh, Linya from Lima, Peru. We know Linya. And Matt Chen from Taiwan. And Rue from Wisconsin. Adriana. Hi, Adriana from here in Celebration.
From very far Celebration, Florida.
Very far. Oh, this is awesome. And Catherine. Hi, Catherine Rattel. And Lisa. Hi from Portugal. Awesome. Well, it's great to see so many people or a few folks online already. I think we're ready to get started. I'm Shannon Hofen, the director for the Center for Self-Determination Theory, which is a nonprofit. Thank you, Kelly. It's a nonprofit organization created to advance SDT by disseminating the philosophy, research, and practices of SDT. That is our mission. It's also responsible for bringing this live program to you today. And the person who is directing and producing this is our program coordinator, Kelly. And Kelly, will you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Kelly. I work here with the Center for Self-Determination Theory. Today is our first ever virtual live Q&A. We have had live Q&As before, but we, due to social distancing and our current times, we're all virtual, safe at our own little cubes. So today, the way it's going to go down is we've had some pre-submitted questions via our social media posts, if some of you have been following along. So people have commented their questions based on our topic for today, relationships and parenting. So we're going to go through our pre-submitted questions, but we'd love to hear any of your live questions. Just comment them down below on our YouTube and Facebook streams right now. So we're streaming in two places. And we'd love to see what kind of questions you've got.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Kelly. And of course, we're joined with Richard Ryan, who is in Rochester. Hi, good morning, Richard.
Good morning, Shannon. Nice to be in the same time zone as you and Kelly at the for this particular broadcast. That's why we can do this one live, unlike our previous ones, where
right.
a day apart from each other. So now I'm looking forward to this.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I just want to give a quick introduction, even though I know everyone who's joining us probably knows who you are. But of course, Richard Ryan is co-founder of Self-Determination Theory. He's also a clinical psychologist, and you're a professor at Australian Catholic University at the Institute for Positive Psychology and Education, which is where you spend some of your time, and where I think we are in our last Q&A where you were. And so you also do a bunch of other things, including your chief scientist at Immersive and Motivation Works. You're busy here. We talk almost daily about the work we're doing here at the center. And your most important title for today's topic is you're a parent and a husband and a friend. So...
Well, I think today's topic is a really good one. I'm glad we're talking about parenting. I look forward to the questions that are being asked. But, SDT, I guess, fundamentally is a theory about human flourishing. And when we think about human flourishing, we think about, how can we provide the things that people really need in order to grow and become all they can be. And parents play such a huge role in that because, they're so important in early development, and they're the most proximal figures to children in terms of who can nurture them. And they're also there as the backstop for all the difficulties that children face as they develop. So this is a great topic. So I'm glad we have some questions coming in about that.
Yeah, it was our number one picked topic from the poll that we did on social media was relationships and parenting, not, relationships ranging from romantic partnerships to friendships to we have a few questions related to COVID environments and how you maintain relationships. But I will say most of the questions that came in were on parenting. So I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting that that was our number one top pick from our poll. I'm curious what you think, why that might be that people chose this as the number one topic.
Well, as I remember the polling, because you showed me it a little bit, I know it was close. There were some other topics that people were also interested in, but I think one thing that I've discovered is it really doesn't matter what topic we're talking about. I could be giving a talk on coaching and coaching styles, or we could be talking about organizations and how to be a manager and a boss. But a lot of times after the talk is over, the adults who come up to speak to me say, I was wondering about some of the things you were saying with respect to my children, and then they the issue of their own parenting. So, I think SDT relates a lot to the kind of issues that parents face. It's kind of a natural interface.
Yeah, that's my experience too, Richard, when, I've seen a lot of your talks, and what seems to resonate is people applying SDT and basic needs to their relationships and parenting. So I hope you're prepared because we got some questions.
Shannon, I'm never prepared, but I do the best I can do. So my ears are open for questions.
Oh, great. Well, we're going to go through some of the ones that were submitted to us ahead of time, and we're going to start with some parenting questions.
Yeah, can I just say one thing quickly, which is, I appreciate that CSDT is trying to promote more live events and issues like this. And, part of the reason we're just doing an open and I call it informal Q&A is because we just don't have the kind of social context that we typically would have in the pre-COVID world. And so this is an informal dialogue. I think we hope to put on some formal programs soon, but this is a nice way for, I think, us to connect. So I appreciate everybody who's tuning in today and any questions that have been sent.
Yeah, and I see a lot of other people joining us from all over, and we didn't get a chance to acknowledge those people, but we are seeing them, and it's really nice to even connect, even if I don't, I'm not saying or we're commenting on each and every person. It's really nice. And I feel like I'm kind of connected with the people, following CSDT and what we're up to. So
great.
All right, let's
go ahead and get started. I'll see what I can do.
All right. First question is, traditional parenting advice tells us to manage behavior with rewards and consequences. That kids lack motivation is often the theory behind non-compliance. What is SDT thinking on self-deficit versus motivation deficit? Are there certain ages developmentally when kids develop more intrinsic motivation? Is there a better question for parents to ask than, how can I get my kid to do X, Y, and Z? And this, I want to note that this is from Janine from Washington.
Well, Janine, I like the question. I just saw it posted there for a minute. What it sounds like is, it begins with the assumption that parents have behavioral goals for their kids, and they're wondering, like, how can I get them there? And one assumption people make is oftentimes when kids aren't doing what parents want them to do, it's because they're not motivated. But there can be lots of reasons why kids are not compliant. It could be that they are not motivated because they don't even understand why they need to do something, or they haven't been given a good rationale. They could be unmotivated because they don't know how to do something, or they're afraid they don't know how to do something. They might not be motivated because they're embarrassed about something, or because there's some other handicap in the way of them getting to what they need to do. So the starting point of SDT is always find that out first. Before you try and be using rewards and punishments as a way of making your kids do something, we need to find out, well, what's the obstacle that's in the way? Mm-hmm. So SDT approaches always begin with, let's try and understand empathically what our child is facing when they're in a moment where they don't look motivated. And let's try and find out what the cause and the obstacle is in the way of that motivation. And that could, again, come back to maybe they don't really understand what the goal is here or why they need to do something. It could be because they really don't know how, and they need some help and some scaffolding and some guidance to do so. So we always begin with the internal frame of reference. And I think one of the problems with people who think that motivation is always the issue, is that they pull out the carrot and the sticks right away. They pull out the rewards and punishments because the assumption is it's a motivational problem. And a good deal of the time, that is not the issue. It's not that kids are not motivated. It's that there's something else in the way. And if you don't diagnose that, all the rewards and punishments in the world won't overcome the obstacles. So part of the reason for taking the frame of reference that you did is to better diagnose what's in the way so that we can actually then do some constructive problem solving. So I hope that addresses the question.
Yeah, I think so. I just want to go a little on the same topic around COVID. I do think that from my own experience as a parent, it's a little hard and challenging these days to get kids motivated because they're in home or they're learning virtually and all of those things. So I just want to say that, as I think that's a really good point that you just made, Rich.
Yeah, no, I think parents are facing a lot of different challenges in the COVID era, particularly parents who are homeschooling. They're finding out some of the, by the way, the challenges that their children face on an everyday basis. And they're also finding out why their kids may be unmotivated for some of the work when parents actually get to see the work that's demanded of children in school. So hopefully that breeds some empathy.
Right. Well, we have several questions and I see more popping in. So I want to jump to the next one. This is from Lada from Russia. Is it possible for parents to keep healthy balance between child's autonomy support and providing safety? How, especially in adolescence?
Can you just post that briefly again? Balance between two. Okay, so thanks. I guess, first of all, I do want to begin with an acknowledgement of the difficulties of adolescence, which is, I think parents do worry about adolescence. Your children are finding new independence and freedoms in the sense of releases from constraints, and that means that they're negotiating a world that does have dangers in it. I don't think there's any parent who doesn't worry about their teen. When I think about balance between safety and autonomy support, though, I think there's something wrong about thinking that there's a balance there, because I can guarantee you this from the literature, which is parents who are more autonomy supportive have kids who are safer because they have better internalized ideas about limits and safety from their parents. They're more responsive to rules and limitations that are out there, and they're more likely to be in a dialogue with their parents about places where there's concerns. So, the first thing I'd say, if there's concerns about safety, it's especially important to become more autonomy supportive, because you're going to be in a better position to be able to work with your growing adolescent to negotiate the dangers of the world that's out there. And why is that? Because parents who are autonomy supportive, before they go, telling their adolescent what to do or what not to do, they're first interested in the adolescent's perspective and helping them develop a perspective on what the challenges and the dangers are so that they can self-regulate when they're out in the world. Mm-hmm. One of the sad things about being a parent is you can't protect your child all the time. So they need to internalize some ideas about how to keep themselves safe. And that comes about through an autonomy supportive and reciprocal dialogue between parent and teenager. As our teenagers are getting older, they want the respect that comes from not being told what to do, but rather entering into a dialogue with people about what is the best things to do in a situation, what their perspective is, and how they can keep themselves safe. So, just as a concrete example, if my teenager were going to a party that night, I would want to ask them about the party and where it is and to tell me about it. Of course, if we have a good relationship, they're willing to tell me and talk to me about some of those things. And then I'm interested in what their plans are and contingencies for how to keep themselves safe. So, what if things do get out of hand around drinking or drugs at a party? What is my teenager's plan for handling that? And then we can talk through those contingencies and be available to help them with that. So all the way around, I think teenagers are safer when they're in an autonomy supportive relationship with parents. That's what the evidence shows. And controlling approaches just typically mean your teenager will stop talking to you about the dangers that they do face. And that means they're going to be under the influence of other people. That's a situation no parent really wants.
Mm-hmm. That's a great answer. The next question comes from Alan, who I saw tuning in. So Alan, here's the question. Most of the evidence-based practices for challenging children are behavioristic in nature. For example, Russell Barkley's program, Parent Management Training for ADHD or Kids with ODD, And PBIS is used a lot in schools on the basis that it has been empirically tested. I see very little of SDT research in an area dominated in 2020 by behaviorism. So what is SDT planning to do about this? What about partnering or doing research with current approaches? How do you explain the research from an SDT approach that supports the needs? Is SDT not a better approach than a behaviorist?
Like a CPS approach.
Yes. Sorry. Yes. Like a CPS approach.
Okay, there's a bunch of elements to that question, and I guess the first one has to do with what is the plight of children who have ADHD or kids who have ADHD in the context of our schools. And part of the problem with ADHD isn't that you have ADHD, it's that you are in a system that demands behaviors that are difficult given your constitution. So the issue for a lot of kids is not their internal problems, but the external challenges that they set them. Part of the problem with ADHD kids is that they're in school systems where the demands are for them to stay attentive and in seats and in a certain kind of behavioral control over long periods of time, which may be oftentimes very, very difficult. And so the response to it is to put in behavioral controls in order to make sure that they do what they're supposed to do, which often is spirit crushing to kids who have ADHD or other kinds of developmental challenges that they're facing. I think it's unfortunate that it is behaviorism that dominates in this area, because although there is some evidence for the effectiveness of behavioral techniques, there's not great evidence that this is really good in terms of nurturing children, helping them develop self-regulation and having develop a healthy self-concept over time. I'm not saying it never contributes to that, but that's not what the evidence base is really about. It's really about behavioral compliance. SDT has a larger goal, which is helping a child to grow into a self-confident place in the world, to feel good about themselves, to be able to establish good relationships, and to be able to internalize. And I think what the data shows is a lot of kids with ADHD are frustrated, particularly with autonomy. Ed DC did some work on this, showing that kids with learning issues in schools were often attributed to have low autonomy, when probably that's not the issue. It's probably, they do have low autonomy, but it's a lot because they are being controlled. They aren't getting the information they want. So Alan, I first want to go along with the fact, bemoan the fact, of course, that SDT isn't bigger in this area, but it's not that it's not being researched or done in this area. I would point you to the work of Michael Waymeyer, for instance, who's been for a long time working on techniques and strategies for kids with developmental challenges and ADHD and other issues in terms of helping them develop self-determination and willingness to be engaged in environments. So I would point you to some of that work. There is increasing work on ADHD and other problems in schools through SDT, but we do need more of it. We need more responsive practices to the individual differences that kids bring to us, as opposed to just trying to make them conform. It's also trying to help our system nurture them. So I think it's a direction we have to go. Now, I just want one more part of that question, because it ended with the thing about CPS and other behavioral techniques and whether they can ever satisfy needs, and whether SDT is better than behaviorism. I think the point I would want to make is, even if you're a behaviorist, you need to attend to the psychological needs of the people with whom you're working. And a technique like CPS, which is called, CPS stands for, I think it's collaborative problem solving, one of the techniques. Part of the reason that CPS even developed is because behaviorists are noticing you need collaboration. You need the willing engagement of the people whose behavior you're trying to shape. And that's why collaborative problem solving is a better approach than non-collaborative problem solving, which is I'll tell you what to do and I'll give you the reinforcements for you to get there. So you even see behaviorism evolving in the direction of SDT. You see more and more responsiveness, acceptance of people taking their point of view, trying to encourage alliance and cooperation, because you need autonomy in order to be successful.
Excellent. And on this same note, Richard, I want to give a kind of a shout out to other researchers. I'm glad you brought up Michael. And this is really more in autism, but I kind of want to share this with the SDT community, is that there is a bunch of research and applied work being done in the in the area of autism. And that's out of University of Ghent with Sarah DePaul, Bart Sonens, and Jolene Vanderkamp. Is that her name? I think she's out of Norway. And then we've got a couple of good partners that we work with that have centers that are focused on severe autism. And Gary and Delilah run a center that I'm in communication with, and that's called, I wrote it down because I thought I might forget it, Alternative Teaching Strategy Center. Mm-hmm. And there's a few other areas. So I just want to kind of bring that up so people are aware that there is work being done in this area.
You know, I have part of Alan's question was, what is SDT going to do about it? And I laughed a little when I saw it because, you know, SDT is us. It's this entire community. It's what we do. And I think, you know, obviously we need more SDT sentiments entering into this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, this next question comes from Dusana from Serbia. And I love this question. Being a mom of a toddler girl, I say that because I'm a mom of a toddler girl. How much of a control and how much of autonomy does a toddler need? It seems that autonomy support for parents might be very exhausting in that particular period of development. Is there some alternatives?
Well, the first thing I want to say is, regardless of how you parent, having a toddler is probably exhausting. So toddlers are active, they're exploring, they're testing the limits on everything. They're trying to figure out what their powers are, where their powers end, how loud their voice can be, how much they can stretch the limits. So, you know, it's part of the developmental tasks of toddlers is to exhaust parents. I guess this is kind of related to an earlier question. One thing I'll say the research suggests is you'll be more exhausted if you try and take a controlling approach. And one piece of evidence for that that I would cite is I think the last time we were having a discussion, I cited the study because I like it so much. It was by Lauren and Joseme, and they were looking at compliance in toddlers, and they compared autonomy supportive parents or parents who try to bring about compliance through autonomy supportive techniques and controlling parents at age 2. And then they followed up these kids at age 3.5. And what they found is that parents were autonomy supportive age 2, they had more compliant children, willingly compliant children who are more willing to do what they requested at age 3.5. Mm-hmm. So I guess if you're thinking about exhaustion, you want to use techniques that are going to save you energy in the future. And I think autonomy support saves that energy. But, you know, more importantly, the reason we want to be autonomy supportive for toddlers is we're trying to help them internalize limits around the world as they struggle to see them. Toddlers want to learn the social rules. They want to discover what it is that they're supposed to do. They would like to be doing the things that they see going on around them. So they're actively wanting to learn. So we want to support that. There are, of course, in toddlerhood, lots of needs to set limits. And SDT has techniques for supporting parents to set limits. But, you know, usually begins with empathy. It begins with when your kid's breaking the rules because they want something, and you want to empathize with what it is that they want or what it is that's frustrating them, even as you clearly set, you know, what the constraint is that now is the time for bed. You know, I know you want to stay up late, or I know that it's exciting to be out here, but now is the time for bed. So it's about empathizing. It's about setting limits, about giving the choices that you can have. You know, for instance, if it's time for bed, but you can read in bed, or you can have your toy in bed, or you can make choices about what can be done there. But you're still setting the rule. You're empathizing and you're giving the choices you have within it. Those kind of things help, and then giving, of course, a reason. Always for why we're making a demand that a kid may not want to comply with. And the part of the importance of the reason is that's helping them anchor and internalize something and have their own reasons for why they would comply. So autonomy support's really important in toddlerhood. There's a lot of great research going on in SDT about this kind of issue. And but, you know, mainly I just want to sympathize with anybody who has a toddler, including you, Shannon. It's a rough world.
It's a rough.
my kids are in their 30s, so we're well beyond that.
Well, and I sympathize with toddler or any parents with toddlers too right now when we've had to be socially distancing and all of those kind of things and doing, you know, learning indoors more and It's not been easy. I sympathize with the parents and the kids.
It hasn't been easy for adults to internalize social distancing. It hasn't been easy for adults to internalize issues about hygiene. So we shouldn't be surprised that our toddlers also struggle with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to get to the next question from Uske, who is in New York.
Uske is here in Rochester, New York.
She is. Sometimes parents are so overwhelmed with what is going wrong with their children. They focus on behavioral or emotional problems and assume that these happen suddenly, or claim that the child was always like that. As SDT researchers and practitioners, we know that is never all of a sudden or out of a blue, but due to need frustrating parenting practices. What would be the best approach to motivate those parents to take responsibility for adopting new relational approaches with their kids?
Well, the scenario in this is that you have a kid who's showing some behavioral problems, and then that may be related to how parents have handled their children in the past. But even if it's not, one of the things I've experienced as a clinician is when your kid is having problems, that's what also parents are maybe most open to change. Mm-hmm. They are interested in trying to do the things that can help their kids. That's why they've come to see you, for instance, as a practitioner. So it's a ripe time for helping them experiment with some new ways of interacting with their children. And one of the things I found is that if I can help people be curious about trying some new ways of interacting with their children, and then come back and talk about it, they find the satisfactions that come with taking that moment to, instead of judging your child, to hear what they had to say, or when your kid has a problem, instead of first telling them, oh, it's not that big a deal, to first hear them out and let them have the drama that they want to have. And that through that listening, you find that you have a more satisfying interaction. And parents come back and say, gee, that really worked well. It's amazing. We had a good talk about that. And so they find that when they start to use the techniques that we're supporting in SDT, they actually work. Or when they don't work, you can find out the mechanics of where or why. So I just say take advantage of that moment when parents are struggling to help introduce them to some new opportunities and some new techniques. It's really not so much about judging how they've done it in the past. It's about showing new pathways through which they can open up need supports for them.
That's great. I'm going to take a question because we have a few questions coming in, Richard. And so I want to get one. This one's along with students. So I thought this might be kind of an internalization. So I thought this might be kind of a good time to ask this question from Rue. They have a question about internalization. If a teacher wants a student to perform an expected behavior to replace a problem behavior in the classroom that is potentially not beneficial to students' intrinsic motivation, because it is an expectation from the teacher. SDT suggests that an autonomy supportive environment can facilitate that value internalization. I'm wondering what an autonomy supportive environment may look like in this case.
Well, SDT is not just about intrinsic motivation. I think I like the question because I think it's really important to make this distinction. Sometimes it's trying to help kids internalize something that may not be intrinsically motivated, but may be important and even gratifying to them if they can pull it off. So when I think about a classroom teacher in this scenario, I think, well, maybe I have a child who's engaging in a problematic behavior, and I want them to reorient. Again, the first thing is to have a talk with that child, to bring up the problematic behavior, to understand their perspective on what's bringing it about. Try and see if you can help them with their perceived causes of why they're doing those things, and give them choices about alternative behaviors. So again, it comes back to this general set of principles around limit setting, which is first empathize, then be clear about what's required, then provide choices around the ways in which we can manage those things and alternative outlets. I think these things are really important as part of the strategy. And then providing feedback when things go well, to make sure that you acknowledge the efforts that you see that child doing. So, I think teachers are really, really important because they're helping children to know what is the appropriate behavior to have in classrooms, what's really required, but they're also empathically trying to help that child find their pathway there without losing the respect, without being humiliated, without feeling punished, without feeling alienated, but instead to feel on board, connected, and attached to somebody who's trying to help them find their right way through. So I think there are ways to do so. I don't think they take more time than being controlling, because this seems to be the theme today, but I want to go back to you can maybe control a child in the moment through a kind of humiliating or a publicly controlling thing, but then you're going to find so many backfiring sequelae to that, things that will happen afterwards that will cost you more time. So I think it's worth taking the time to understand an individual child's perspective, help them find a new behavior, and keep working with them on it, because it's not always that it happens all at once.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to get to this next question from Jacob from the U.S. Albert Bandura writes that to make their way successfully through a complex world of challenges, people have to anticipate the probable effects of different events and courses of action. This idea seems consistent with how SDT characterizes autonomy support, since informed decisions are likely to be more autonomous decisions. But this claim also uses the phrasing have to. How might parents approach helping their children anticipate consequences of their actions in an autonomy supportive way, given linguistic structures that often bear resemblance to psychological control?
Thanks. I'm just taking a minute to absorb the question here. Well, it sounds like the first thing is that there are demands that we need to make of children. There are things that they need to do. There are things that have to be done. So these are kind of structures in the world that sometimes we're informing children about. We also use these same words, have to, should, and need, in other ways that are very psychologically controlling, like you must do this thing versus this is a thing that must be done. And you notice that there's a difference in that locution. This is the thing that must be done. It's just saying it in person, it's saying for all of us, this is the rule. Whereas saying you need to do this thing, that means I'm telling you what to do and I'm controlling you. So you see in the child developmental literature, some work on this issue of locution or how people word things that make them less controlling. But I want to go to kind of more fundamental thing. I don't think we need to be that careful about the particular words we use if we have the right intent. Because I think people understand our intent. Our children, our students understand our intent. When we say, oh, this needs to be done, they will not take it as controlling if I'm saying it in a way that was really just pointing out the facts and then acknowledging how much effort this might take to accomplish it or whatever that might be. It's about what we intend when we're doing something. So if we're helping somebody, if we're giving somebody an instruction that's you need to do this and you should do this, and we're doing it because we're trying to pressure them into an outcome, it's going to be controlling. But if I'm informing them about this is the things that need to be done in order for this goal to be obtained, what's your perspective on that? I'm engaging them in what's needed. I'm helping them find an autonomous route to that end. And so I wouldn't get too caught up in the particular words. I would get caught up a lot in what's our intention, and to motivate somebody else, or trying to make them do something, realize what the circumstances. So some of those words are really structured. I want to go to one other thing, is even tone of voice will matter in this. And this is some really cool work that Netta Weinstein and other colleagues have done recently, just showing that a controlling tone of voice with the same words will have a different impact on the motivation of the recipient of that. In SDT, we call that functional significance. We say that our communications have a different meaning of functional significance to people. When we intend to control them, usually the meaning that comes across is they're trying to control me. So I think pay attention to what your motives are.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point, and thanks for bringing in the tone. I always find that work, this is kind of new work by Netta and colleagues, that's really interesting. So it's not necessarily the words you use.
Right.
So this is our last question for parenting, and we're going to move on to relationships. So when a child has behaved inappropriately, what are some ways to effectively respond that don't convey conditional regard for the child? And maybe, Rich, you can kind of tell people what conditional regard for some people in the audience that may not be familiar with that work.
Well, conditional regard really has to do with when a parent uses a psychological control to get their children to do appropriate behavior. So I convey to my child, I will like them more, or I will love you more if you behave this way, or I will like you less or love you less if you don't behave in X way. This is conditional regard. It's making my care, valuation, and love for you contingent on the way you act. And yeah, that's a form of control, and it can actually sometimes breed compliance in kids, but it's also associated with a lot of developmental problems later and high introjection and internal conflict. Other things. So there's a rich literature on conditional regard that SDT. I point people to Guy Roth and colleagues who've done a lot of work with this. So I want to go back to the question though, which is my child is behaving inappropriately. How do I handle their inappropriate behavior without saying, you're a bad boy, or, you're unlovable when you act that way? How can I do it? Well, again, we get back to parents' job is to help kids internalize, to help them find the right ways to behave, to help socialize them. So if a behavior is truly inappropriate, the first thing I want to do is stop the inappropriate behavior. So that's not for doing, adults aren't for hitting, things on the shelves here are not for grabbing. So you're telling the child this is not okay. And you're being clear about what's not okay in appropriate behavior. But you're also then, if you have the moment and the space for doing it, it's, trying to understand reflect why they might have done that. I know that stuff's attractive, but it's not for grabbing, or that's not ours to take. These are ways in which you're both empathizing and showing some respect. This helps the child to comply because it means you're not a bad person for having wanted to do that. It's just that that's not the thing to be done. So in a way, we love our kids for their impulses, and we still at the same time put a limit on what's inappropriate and inappropriate to do. And a huge thing in SDT, and this is not unique to SDT, it's also related to Carl Rogers' approaches, there's a big difference between accepting an emotion versus accepting a behavior. Mm-hmm. I think we accept all of our kids' emotions. We accept all the feelings that they have, but there are some behaviors that we don't accept and we do set them aside. And we can convey both those things at the same time. We can appreciate your motive or your feeling or your impulse or your urge, and at the same time we can be clear about what's okay and what's not okay. And then, where we can, we provide alternative outlets. Let's say a kid's behaving inappropriately because they're really angry and they want to break something. Well, things aren't for breaking, but the anger is understandable, and here's a way you can express your anger. You can tell me as strongly as you want how, or you can throw stones at the tree over there and pretend that that's blah. There are ways in which you can say, it's okay to express anger. I accept that behavior. And we're clear about it. And I think that's really, really important, because if we get kids to comply in the conditional regard way, we still have not really helped them fully come to an integration around it. We've left them with inner conflict, and we also have conveyed to them, hey, you're not lovable in your own right. You're only lovable if. And that's not where we've done with our children.
Well, before we kind of end the parenting question, I kind of want to bring it back to some work that you can elaborate maybe briefly, as I know we've got several other questions on relationships, but it's some recent work we've been featuring for Friday Features about the stress that's on parents and then how that trickles down. We're talking about, a lot of the questions have been around children's behavior, and I just want to kind of shift just a little to the parental behavior as well, because I think that's fascinating research, and people can find that on our website and on our social media pages.
Yeah, if I could just briefly summarize it, I think some of that recent research is showing that parents tend to be most controlling when they themselves are experiencing a lot of need frustration. And that's when they don't have the bandwidth to really be empathic with their children. By the way, this is also true in couples. It's after the bad day at work that the spouse comes home and is not sympathetic or nice to their partner. So we can sometimes be not as responsive when our own resources are low, and that's what some of those recent Friday features are showing, that controlling parenting is often a parent issue.
Yeah. Well, we're going to turn now to some relationships, and they kind of cross the gamut from like work relationships to, romantic relationships. So I'm going to jump right into it. This one's from Rainer, who I saw online from Germany. What does reframing the narrative of our relationship do to our sense of relatedness? There are coaching practices and exercises on how to deal with difficult people in the workplace, no matter whether these are subordinates, peers, or bosses. What comes immediately to my mind is the just like me compassion exercises, the noble story practice of loving kindness meditation. I wonder if they actually support or potentially thwart the need of relatedness, or whether we deceive ourselves.
Well, again, there's a few questions in the question. Can you just post it one more time quickly for me? Oh, then, okay, yes, thank you. So I think there's been a lot of attention in workplaces recently on the importance of relationships. And so there's been a lot of people trying to help managers, bosses, supervisors find new ways of relating in which they can really connect to their workers. And some of those are the ones some techniques for that are the ones that are mentioned here. I know that just like me technique, I think that's a Zen or a Buddhist technique that's really about putting yourself in the place of the other, or imagining you are just like the other person who's being that difficult person. You have the same tendencies, and it helps you empathize. It helps you put yourself in the shoes of the other person and try and understand more compassionately where they might be coming from. And the same is true with some of the self-compassion exercises that I've seen. I'm not really familiar with the noble story or whatever that is, so I can't speak to that, but I assume that these are all techniques that probably have most of their power in helping you take the internal frame of reference or empathize with the other person with whom you're interacting and understand that whatever looks like non-compliance or being difficult is coming from someplace that you can probably have an understanding of. And, for me, that's part of what I would want in an interaction with a difficult employee, is to begin that by acknowledging that we've had some difficulties, and I would like to hear their point of view on it. And I mean, really hear their point of view, not do that as a technique, not do that as an inauthentic thing of, oh, I heard that was the thing you're supposed to do. It's because I really do want to understand where they're coming from and what the obstacles are in their way are. Because if I'm truly supportive, I'm trying to clear those out of the way so that they can come into coherence and cohesiveness with the rest of our workplace. You want to take interest in difficult employees because they're telling you something. They're giving you the symptom of something that you probably want to pay attention to in the organization. So again, it always begins with empathy, and then it begins with also then trying to help give a rationale for the things that they may or may not understand. And if it's a skill issue, help them scaffold and get the skills they need to get there. In other words, diagnose the problem and then come through with the needs support that's required, whether it be autonomy support, competence support, or relatedness.
I think that answers the question of whether it feels authentic, right, Richard? Of it coming across as either people are going to internalize that as, oh, my need for relatedness is being satisfied, or being thwarted, right? Because I just kind of want to get to the end part of it.
I guess a piece to me is, even in SCT, we have things that we call techniques, but you don't do a technique unless you actually really believe in what the aim is. And the aim of SCT is to help that person flourish, help them come to a willing engagement in what they need to be doing. And that's an authentic pursuit that we're engaged in. It doesn't have to be just a fake thing to get to an outcome. It's not just about getting compliance. It's about really having that communication that brings us into a cohesive organization. I don't like techniques as they're done to manipulate people. So even SDT can be used in a manipulative way, and then it will come across as controlling, and then it will backfire. So,
yeah, I think that's
authenticity is huge, and people sense it.
Yeah. This question is another work relationship question. When an organization is trying to build a context that satisfies basic needs, there's often the comment that there are still a bunch of people showing resistance. Is it better to go on with the people who are showing positive outcomes and try to look at how their needs are evolving? Or should you put your energy in the people who are resistant and look at what's going wrong? Should a company invest in individual causes?
Well, I think this is a great question. Corporate change or organizational change, if not a corporation, is often not easy. It means creating a new culture, and often that culture gets initiated top down. And that means people at the top of the culture really need to change their ways of interacting. Sometimes it's a bottom-up culture change, and that begin with an HR initiative that's really working on lower levels employees, and things need to bubble up. So organizational change can happen in some different directions. What's the question again?
So whether you focus on the people who are doing well,
yes. Yeah,
versus people who might be more resistant.
And so in the context of organizational change, this is where I was trying to go with that, is I think resistance is something you want to embrace. I think you want to hear out that resistance. So if I think there's a group of people who are resisting and I'm the manager who's trying to create that corporate change, I want to go find out what that's about. I'm interested. I'm curious about it. Not in a punitive way, not in a you better get on board, because, well, that's a culture. It's not the culture we're trying to create with SDT. So if people are resisting, there's something that they're feeling threatened about. It's something that maybe they don't feel like they have the skills, or maybe they think it's going to go the wrong direction, or maybe they're afraid of some outcomes. I want to find out what those fears are, what those challenges are, what those things are, so I can support people to move through them. So this is also true in psychotherapy, by the way. Resistance is our friend. Resistance is speaking to us. We want to hear the resistance. As a manager, as a therapist, as a parent, you want to bring out the resistance, because otherwise you can't grapple with it. You can't problem solve around it. There can be no collaborative problem solving unless you've identified the problem. And that means go toward the resistance, go toward that thing. So that doesn't mean to neglect the people who are on board and thriving in your new initiative. Of course, they are thriving in it. They're probably already experiencing the benefit of it. And they'll get more of it the more the resistors are able to come on board. So value resistance, I guess, is the bottom line. Think of it as a friend as opposed to an enemy. It's not a threat. It's part of the discovery of a change process.
And Richard, I think this question is really just so pertinent right now to work organizations. And I know you're doing a lot of work in this area about organizations trying to pivot and, do things different in a COVID world, working remotely, et cetera. So can you just, I'm trying to get through the questions, but I just want to be sure we also get some of these things that might be of interest.
Sure. I think, right now there's a big struggle with how to manage people remotely, for instance, because a lot of people are now either in a hybrid situation where they're part office or part workplace and part remote, or even people who generally work remotely, the way in which they're supervised has changed to be more driven by remote devices. And it's harder to connect around that. You miss some of the kind of everyday ongoing exchanges and opportunities for feedback. So one of the things I think about it, the management change in these really difficult times, is you have to be intentional in making contact with people. Whereas before, sometimes that could happen naturally in the context of a workplace. You have to intentionally make sure you're getting the pulse of where your workers are at all the time. That means you also need to intentionally make space for actually just social contact that's not evaluative. You also have to watch for too much micromanagement that can happen because of your fear about remote work, and try to make sure everybody's working. So, this is also a time, and we can get into the weeds on this, but I would say management by objectives is a better approach than management through surveillance, because management by objectives holds people responsible for getting stuff done, but not in a moment-to-moment way trying to tell them how to do it. And that's going to give them more sense of autonomy and flexibility, and therefore more adaptability. There's so much to talk about in this realm that you've just pointed out, but I don't want to get off into the weeds on this. But there are a lot of new challenges for managers in the age of COVID, and I think it's not going to go away even when COVID's done. The workplace is changing, and management techniques are changing in accord with it. It's about bringing people on board with your mission, not trying to force them to comply with your mission from the outside. Well,
this next question is from Hans in the Netherlands. SDTs are widely applied to fields such as education, therapy, management, sports, health, etc. But it seems to me that looking at research as well as my observation in the Netherlands, it doesn't seem to be applied in the field of social work. Can you comment on that and maybe share some ideas?
Well, did you say that this is Hans?
Hans.
So Hans, first of all, I can say I'm acutely aware of this because my wife is a social worker. She's a clinical social worker, and so we talk all the time about the dynamics in our professions. I will say that there is some representation of SDT within social work, although, as you point out, it's not pervasive. One person you might look to is Michael Dover, who's done some really nice essays on basic psychological need satisfaction and social work theory. And I do know that Sarah Swords, a friend of mine who's a social worker at University of Texas, says it's taught in some of the courses in social work at the University of Texas. So I think here and there we see smatterings of it, but it's certainly not the central theory that it has become in psychology. We've seen a lot more SDT in professions like nursing, sport coaching, and in medical spheres than we have seen in social work. Part of that is just the disciplinary boundaries. So I guess I would encourage you to help your social work colleagues get in contact with SDT. Clearly, SDT is relevant to so many other roles that social workers play. And social work, like psychology, is such a diverse profession. I mean, you have within social work, you have people who are working in social welfare kinds of issues. There have people who are psychotherapists. You have people who are involved in behavior change movements and interventions, in social policy making, and hospital administration. So social work's by no means one activity, but I think SDT is hugely relevant to that area of work, and hopefully Hans, you can help us promote it more with the social work.
Great. Well, we have a few more questions that have been that we've collected previously, so I want to be sure to get those out. So I'm going to kind of do a little speed round here at the end. In parenting and relationships,
answer quickly. Is that what you're saying? I'll try.
You can try, and we'll do, maybe if we. I don't know how. I know we were trying to keep this to an hour, but maybe we can take a one or two questions from a few people coming in. But I'm going to get through this one. This one's
from me, Shannon. Or you should say, Rich, I understand how you like to go on and on about every question, but now is the time for a succinct answer. I just talk about the elaborations on this, but now is the time to be short.
I'm just as guilty. I could just go off on like the one question, and talk. But I'm gonna push here, and this is gonna be from Alessandro from Italy. In parenting and relationships, when we hold different views from those of other people, how can we prevent or de-escalate interpersonal conflict? I like this question. I feel like it's particularly difficult when emotions are running high.
Oh, it is difficult. When we have different views from other people, we're often feeling either threatened by their point of view or really wanting to convince them of our point of view. So motivation runs high, conflict can run high. But when you look at how conflicts actually get resolved, it almost always begins with one person who takes the existential risk of trying to understand the other's point of view, really understand. Step back for a minute. And I would say if I wanted to de-escalate the conflict, the first thing I would do is I would try and step back and say, let me see if I've got your point of view right. And then reiterate that point of view as fully and as meaningfully as I can. Just restate the other person's position to make sure I've got it right, so that they can elaborate and really tell me where they're coming from. And then if I've done that well, if they felt heard, they're going to be in a better position to also hear me. And this is how true dialogue begins. It's not by trying to tell people that they're wrong, or cut them off, or in some way humiliate them or shame them with their incompetence. It's really trying to understand where are they coming from and help them understand where you're coming from. And through that means, that's what human dialogue is about. We'll come to some higher synthesis. And we'll also experience in that we respect each other. So I think, even above and beyond the content argument that people have, coming away feeling, well, at least I was respected in that, and that person did understand me, that's going to go a long way to keeping communication.
Great. This is a next question. It's about COVID-19. When health workers are using virtual methods of patient care versus physical visits, how do you think this impacts the average patient's sense of autonomy and feelings of need fulfillment with their care providers?
I know there's a lot of discussion out there about whether a virtual context, like a virtual psychotherapy session, can in any way be as rich as a face-to-face session. I can tell you a bit of my own experience with this because I've been doing some sessions online, and of course I had a lot of experience with face-to-face sessions, which I think you can be very intimate in an online session. I think with an online session, you still get to see facial expressions, you still get to connect emotionally, you still get to hear out the issues that people have. So a lot of connectedness can happen even if you're not in the physical presence of another person. And I think in some ways, and I say this kind of surprisingly, we've seen some very positive results from virtual connections over the advantages of face-to-face. And I'm just going to give you one example of that, but I'm involved in a project here, well, not here, in Australia, because now I'm here in the US, but whatever, in Australia, with people experiencing first episode psychosis. So this is a project that's operating out of Melbourne. And when COVID hit, they had to change the strategy of intervention from face-to-face to online. They've actually found higher satisfaction with the online content because they're easier to arrange. They're not as inconvenient. You don't have to bring a face-to-face person into your home and deal with all the kind of anxieties and self-consciousness associated with that. So they've actually seen more attendance at sessions and from the face-to-face. Plus, it's cost less. You don't have to do the transportation. There's logistical advantages. So we can look for the positive side of the COVID changes that have happened here, which is we're learning how to use technologies to connect. And we can do that really well. And I think we can do that really well in counseling, psychotherapy, coaching. This is a great vehicle for talking to each other. I'm glad we're talking today. We need to make it, again, intentional use of devices to connect in new ways, because we're not going to be able to always connect.
This is a good point. And Debbie raised a question early on, and I don't have it, but I did try to take it in as it was coming in, but it's about friendships during COVID. So that's about patient care. Oh, here, thank you, Kelly. During COVID, it's been very difficult to maintain friendships that are important, missing the connections. How can we bridge the gap?
Well, first, Debbie, I want to acknowledge the truth of what you say. I've been doing some, I wasn't really doing the research. I'm involved in some research that's being initiated by the Ghent group. Sophie and Martin and others who are in the Ghent group have doing a large-scale study of compliance with COVID-19 in Belgium. And one of the things they've seen is that compliance has been going down in the population in Belgium with social distancing and some of the prevention measures, particularly in young people, and particularly in young people who live alone, who don't have a partner with them. And it's a result of relatedness, frustration. So kind of confirming your point here, in the middle of COVID-19, a lot of people are feeling isolated. A lot of people are feeling like they're not connecting. A lot of people are feeling the frustration, the very basic need we all have for relatedness. And it's not, I can't in any way say it's not better to be with people physically. We love being with people physically. It's part of our nature. So this just gets us back to kind of an earlier point, which is we have to use the tools that we have now to connect as deeply as we can. And that means we need to be more intentional in our use of these tools, where before I could hang out with my friends and maybe over the couple of days that we're hanging out, a couple of intimate conversations happen in there. Now when I call them, I want to get to those things. I want to be more direct about getting to the things that I really need to talk about and express. So we need to make use of our electronic devices. We need to contact people more. We also need to think about the people in our lives who might be isolated, and how we might be able to help them out by contacting them. So I do think friendships are hurting in this time. That means we need to be more proactive in using the tools we have to connect with our friends, and then to have a real listening ear when we are so connected. Something happened to my screen here, so I'm trying to, there, getting back. Am I on?
Well, Well, we're right at the hour mark, and we've got one last question that was previously submitted, and maybe we can take one question. Murat's been awaiting. He's submitted his questions twice now, I see.
Okay.
But I'm going to ask, so maybe
we can take a couple minutes. I'm not in a hurry, but let's.
Okay, I just want to be sure if our audience is willing to bear with us. We're going to just take 2 more questions. So this one is from Trazik from the Netherlands. Do you know if someone in the world more use is made of SDT around the financial challenges of a lot of people?
Well, it's interesting that this is brought up because it's a conversation we were just having this week. One person who I think would be good to contact, who's the person who asked this question?
It's Trazik from the Netherlands.
Trazik, you might contact Stefano Di Domenico. He's at the University of Toronto. He's initiating a program of research around people's motivation to deal with their own personal finances. And so he's on top of this literature very much. I think what we've been looking at a lot in SDT is how financial challenges have an impact on well-being through basic psychological needs. So there's been a lot of research showing that money can lead to happiness insofar as the money is used in ways that lead to greater need satisfaction, whereas money doesn't lead to happiness if it's simply about acquisition and materialism. I think also there's been research about income inequality and how income inequality in areas has a negative impact on well-being because it hurts people's feelings of psychological needs. Again, it interferes with their sense of relatedness to others and also has them feeling less competent and socially comparing and other kinds of issues. So there's a lot of good work on SDT about how money affects our well-being, but there's not a lot of good research in SDT about how people's motivation for dealing with money, for managing money, for thinking about retirement, for life planning. These are areas that haven't been investigated enough. I just, again, just to elaborate a little bit, at our work at Immersive, which is the company that I work with, Scott Rigby and others, we've done some work with financial planning companies to help motivate people to save for retirement. And one of the things we found is that when people focus on their intrinsic goals for retirement, they become more motivated to save money. That was something that the industry was really always focused on, trying to get people to think about their extrinsic goals, the stuff they could have in old age. But when you think instead about where you would like to be and the kind of activities you'd like to be doing, that's more incentive for actually saving for retirement. So I think SDT has a lot we can do around helping people become motivated to be more financially literate, to become more engaged with managing something that is important in all of our lives. And we can also do more work about how social policies are affecting well-being through the distribution of wealth. It's an area that we just need to do a lot more work in. So, but try contacting Stefano and see if he's got some better leads than I've just given.
Wonderful. We're going to take one last question from Murat, who I know has been waiting to ask this question, but I want to, so I'm going to get to the question. Well, I'll come back to this point in just a second. Oh, thanks, Kelly. Kelly's, yeah, thank you. So I'll ask the question and then I'll come back to this point. Don't let me forget, because it has to do with Martin Van Stinkist and Sophie and people in Ghent in that study, because I want to make an announcement to the audience. So I want to be sure to get that out. So here's the question I have about need satisfaction in online learning environments. I'm doing research on basic need satisfaction and engagement in online learning environments, and I would like to learn what you think about those social contextual conditions or factors that would best satisfy the needs in online learning environments.
Well, Murat, first of all, I'm glad you're doing research in this area, because this is a place where the application of SDT is particularly crucial. I think we're going to see that more and more and more education is going to be done at a distance. It's going to be done remotely. It's going to be done online. And so understanding what are the elements within an online learning course that facilitate feelings of autonomy, that facilitate feelings of competence, and facilitate that sense of connectedness and relatedness, really, really important. That said, can we pinpoint some things that we could point to already that would lead online education to be more need supportive and therefore motivating? I guess the first thing is we can always get to the issue of relatedness. And relatedness happens in online courses through two ways. There's relatedness to an instructor that comes about because you feel like that instructor understands the point of view of his or her learners. You get that because that learner shows sympathy and interest in the perspectives of the people that are in that audience, is responsive to questions and to issues that come up from their classes. So that responsiveness, that giving people voice, that providing venues for inputs to the instructor, really important in terms of how you structure an autonomy supportive online experience. And that's also a way of conveying relatedness, that I care about the people that I do. So autonomy, support, and relatedness go hand in hand in the context of an online course. Of course, online courses can be structured to create choice and different pathways for students to demonstrate competence. Choice does enhance intrinsic motivation and has people feel more engaged. I think, online courses, like any course, need to be scaffolded so that the challenges that face students are ones that they can succeed at if they engage them. And if they can't succeed at them, they know the pathways to get the extra help so that they can get the inputs that they need to get ahead. So a structure within online classrooms that provides competence support's really, really important. I guess, Murat, the main thing I'd be thinking about is, how am I structuring my course to meet these three needs? And when you think through in that design way about your course, you're likely to create a more responsive course. I will say, Shannon, we have an online course that we created through Coursera, and I wish we had thought more about that. The next time I do a course, I'm going to be even more concerned about how I attend to the needs of students. I kind of used a traditional paradigm. I think there's lots of ways that could be improved. So I think we're going to face a period of innovation ahead. I think SDT is going to be key in that innovation, because the things that really work in online learning are going to be the things that tick the boxes of people's basic psychological needs. And so, Murat, please tell us what you learned as you do your research. I think the SDT community and every single teacher out there is going to be wanting to know. This is a great area for research. Thanks, Murat.
It is. And Molly Metz, who Richard Ryan, commented on this and said, I'm dealing with this too. Come hang with us in the Society for Teaching Psych groups. Lots of good strategies there, and I'm happy to brainstorm too. So
that's Molly Metz, METZ. So get a hold of her on the web, and I think she'll have lots of strategies.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Molly Metz.
I know you are. And I want to just make one announcement. It had to do with the work you are doing with the Belgian group, the Ghent group, and some other scholars on COVID compliance and this big study that they're doing. We are actually, CSDT is working with that team as well, and we're going to be disseminating some of the reports and resources in a podcast from Linnea, who is on here, and Martin Van Stinkes, talking about this study. And in the next week, we hope to be able to post that via our listserv and website and social media. So be looking for that, because I think it's a really interesting study. And I just want to be sure people know that they'll be able to get that information soon.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating study, and so I'm glad that we're doing a podcast on it. That's great. Thanks, Linnea. Thanks, Martha. Thanks, Sophie.
Yeah. Well, I think that concludes our Q&A for today. But we've had I keep seeing all the people coming in. And so I want everyone to know, thank you for tuning in. We saw your comments and where you're from, and we took that in. And I want to give a special thanks to Kelly Lamos. Yeah. If we can Kelly, can you put yourself on? Because you're a big part of this production today.
Hey, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. And I want to give of course, thank you, Richard Ryan, for answering all these questions. I'm glad you were answering them.
Could I just say one thing, Shannon, which is, we had this informal Q&A today. We can do other things. We're always trying to think about what we can do to enhance the SDT community. We've been thinking about maybe doing some mini lectures or some topical discussions. Other kinds of things. So if you have ideas about what you'd like to see CSDT doing, please write Shannon or me. or Kelly, let us know what you have in mind, and we'll try and produce some responsive programs for that. But I appreciate everybody who listens in today. And, you know, I like these question and answer sessions. They're challenging and they're fun.
They are. And one last shout out to Immersive, who we share an office with here in Celebration. And they also are a big supporter of CSDT. So thank you, Immersive, and Scott Rigby and the team there. And I think that concludes our Q&A for today. But it's good to see you, Richard, and good to see everyone online.
Thanks.
All right.